You are on the bus, headphones in, lips moving slightly, and you are definitely not listening to music. You are talking to yourself in a language that isn't yours, and the person next to you is starting to notice. But the real reason this works is far more interesting than it looks. Talking to yourself in another language isn't a quirk. It isn't a coping mechanism. It reflects your brain using that language as a tool for thinking, not just for communication. Here's what's actually happening. When you listen to a language, your brain receives. When you talk to yourself in it, your brain generates. And generation is the hard part. The part that separates someone who understands a language from someone who can actually use it. Psychologist Lev Vygotsky, who studied a broad range of topics in psychology and development, proposed that inner speech is an important psychological tool, the internal monologue that runs constantly underneath your conscious thoughts. Rather than simply being silent speech, inner speech helps people plan actions, solve problems, guide their behavior, and reflect on their thoughts and emotions. It is, in a very real sense, one of the key ways your mind talks to itself. And here is the part that changes everything. When you start using a second language in your inner speech, even imperfectly, even in half sentences and fragments, even if that fragment is just, wait, how do you say, ugh? You are not just practicing vocabulary. You are beginning to build the ability to think directly in that language, relying less on mental translation over time. Most learners gradually shift from translating to increasingly direct thinking, and many continue to use both strategies depending on the situation. But the direction of travel matters. Most learners get stuck in translation mode. They think in their first language, convert it to the second, and then speak. That conversion takes time. It creates the lag you feel in conversations, the half-second delay where your brain searches for the right word while the other person waits, and you panic slightly. Talking to yourself collapses that gap. It forces your brain to generate language without the safety net of a first language thought already formed and waiting to be translated. You reach for the word in the new language first, because there is no other version already queued up. Researcher Alain Morin, who studies self-talk and inner speech extensively, has found associations between more frequent and elaborate inner speech and stronger self-regulation and more nuanced emotional processing. The relationship is complex, but the brain that talks to itself appears to be a brain that is actively working rather than passively receiving. Now apply that to language learning. Every time you narrate your commute in French, argue with yourself about dinner plans in Spanish, or dramatically replay an argument in Japanese that you definitely won, you are giving your brain a low-stakes, high-repetition workout in generating that language independently. And this doesn't mean muttering full sentences out loud. Inner speech is often extremely abbreviated. Instead of thinking, I need to buy milk on my way home, your brain might simply flash milk after work. Starting to conduct even that kind of compressed mental shorthand in a second language is already training the brain to reach for it directly, without going through your first language first. No teacher, no textbook, no conversation partner. Just you, a language your brain is slowly learning to think in, and possibly a slightly concerned fellow passenger. This is also why the muttering sounds the way it does. Fragmented, repetitive, sometimes trailing off mid-sentence. That's not failure. That's your brain operating at the exact edge of its current ability, which is precisely where learning happens fastest. Psychologists call this the zone of proximal development, the gap between what you can do independently and what you can do with support. Self-talk in a second language puts you in that zone constantly without you having to schedule a lesson or find a conversation partner or summon the courage to speak to an actual human being who might notice you conjugated incorrectly, And here's the final piece that most people completely miss. Talking to yourself in another language makes you less afraid of speaking it to others, because by the time a real conversation arrives, your brain has already had that conversation 100 times, alone, on the bus, in the kitchen, in the shower. The words aren't strangers anymore. They're familiar. Slightly worn in. Already yours. So the next time you catch yourself muttering vocabulary under your breath on public transport or narrating your afternoon in a language you're still learning, don't stop. You're not talking to yourself. You're talking to the version of you that already knows the language. You're just catching up.